System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.
This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Today is Wednesday, December 17th. I am Amin TMK alongside Amoja Lil Tanky Sumler. Amoja, hello. Happy Wednesday. What's the word? How are you feeling? How's your week been?
Man, you know, I don't even have no jokes, man. We actually in such a dangerous place. All I have is analysis. I feel observant and blessed to be so.
I will try to keep us light then, because you know what it is? It's World War III level violence, genocides. Are they happen every day, B? You know, and here we are. But let's get to the nitty gritty here. Donald Biden, Joe Trump, not my president, but he is a president of the United States. Put out a little thing on his True Social whatever account. I don't like posting stuff like this, but this is a pretty big bomb right here. This is what he posted on Venezuela. This was yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever, armada capitalization, assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger. And then the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before. Until such time as they return to the United States of America, all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation. And likewise, we will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump. I apologize for obviously the ridiculous and incredibly racist rhetoric you have to kind of go through to hear this, but let's just get your response. How I know that liberals want to always say the taco thing, and at the end of the day, this is not going to happen, but it does seem to be escalating. Do you think it is imminent, and how do you respond to this?
What does that say, though, right? That liberals continue to call Trump taco, right? Trump always chickens out. To egg this very egotistical, borderline narcissistic, again, I'm not a health professional, so I don't like to make, pronunciations about people's mental health. But from my limited understanding, this looks like textbook a narcissistic personality. To egg this man on, to say things like, oh, he'll chicken out. Those are attacks on Trump to the right. You get what I'm saying? It's saying that he's not tough enough. He's not really tough on crime, right? Which is, again, Democratic language. I almost feel sorry for the Republicans that voted for this man, that felt like he was the safer choice, as ironic as that sounds to many, because he campaigned like Obama on being anti-war, pulling America out of all of these extra wars. And there are people that legitimately voted for Donald Trump for that purpose. They were willing to overlook everything else, and we can talk about that too, right? I'm not saying that they're good people. I'm saying this is something they genuinely believed. This was something they wrestled with, and something ultimately they told themselves he's a safer choice. I think it also goes to the concept of why harm reduction is not a useful political strategy, right? Where we have to not like, oh, we're trying to reduce the harm. We have to remove the harm. We have to move past those ideologies. But at the end, the only people I feel truly sad for are the Venezuelan people. That whole letter is fascinating. They got to return our oil, our land. Like, that is just fascinating to see the way that his mind works. Like, this is our oil, like off the rip. Like, it's not worth mentioning. Of course, there'll be no recriminations for this. That the Europeans, you're not going to hear Starmer say anything about this, right? All of the people are like, oh, the Russians went into Ukraine. None of those countries are going to say anything about this. This is a naked colonial act, unprovoked. Venezuela is no military threat to the United States proper, right? The homeland, right? They may be a threat to American soldiers in Venezuela, right? But that's a very different thing because that's harm that never comes if you don't provoke that harm. And here we are, you know. It wounds me because the people that believe in the Democrats right now, it's time for them. They're nominally claiming to be leftist, right? That have swept into power behind the belief of the left, AOCs, the Mamdanis, Sanders. They're not going to make this something they go to the killing floor for. Mamdani's already, he's a tyrant. Okay. So let's say that he was, right? Let's just assume, does that give the United States the automatic de facto right to remove him, right? Never mind the fact that it's a completely artificial position, because do you say these things about Mohammed bin Salman, who is a literal prince, right? Is he the legitimate ruler, right? What about King Hussein in Jordan, right? When it comes to these monarchs, they never have anything to say. But this is a person that has put himself, Maduro, up to the will of the people. Most polls have him at anywhere between 85% approval from the people, right? What they cannot stand is this is a man, the United States can never allow socialism to win, period, anywhere. And the other thing that this hurts de facto is it allows them to seize essentially any tanker that's going to go to Cuba, because Cuba's on the sanction list. So if you go to, you know what I'm saying? And then also by, this is the last thing I'll say, by designating the government of Venezuela a terrorist organization, that means you can't work with anyone in the current government. That goes beyond Maduro, right? So now you're saying the Supreme Court, they're terrorist, the parliament, they're terrorist, right? This exposes any lie where it's like, oh, it's about Maduro, because then you would have said Maduro is a terrorist, right? Which, again, this is not me saying that Maduro is any of these things. This is me playing out the American logic to its logical fullest extent. None of it makes sense. The only thing that's honest is the Americans feel like all that oil is theirs. And that's wild. Stephen Miller put out a little funky ass, incredibly racist tweet. The whole government is behind this, at least the executive, and I don't see any serious pushback, from the legislative branch or from the judicial branch. They're going to allow this to happen, and ultimately, I feel like it's a bigger game, right? They need the petroleum, and they need the gold and mineral wealth of Venezuela, because it's all to chase after this AI Ponzi scheme. Like, they've done the numbers. They know that America cannot generate enough energy for their models to reach what is called AGI, which is essentially awareness. Until that happens, they need all the fuel they can. They're literally going to kill people to fuel this machine. And this is something that Castro talked about in his final years. This is ultimately what capitalism does. It kills people to fund and fuel machines.
Yeah, pretty intense stuff going on right now. I mean, he is again, it goes back to what I was saying with the, joking with the Joe Trump and Donald Biden thing is that, this is the 80-year-old man who has a history of racism going back to when he was just a businessman in New York. And if you look at the way that letter is written, it's written with the words like illegal aliens. I mean, how could it be America's
human
oil
trafficking
in Venezuela? The nerve of someone like Donald Trump to talk about human trafficking when you have the most photos of anyone in the world with Jeffrey Epstein is true hypocrisy. And, I think this ramping up, and we watched, what was it? The Running Man, the old movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they talked about the Department of Justice Entertainment Division. And if you look at Pete Hegseth, to me, he is the Department of Justice Entertainment Division. And anytime he gets up there and starts talking, you can see why these generals look at him like, who TF are you? And I asked you about this the other day, and we've been hearing about sons and daughters. Anyway, I won't ruin it too much. We're talking about Pete Hegseth, so I'll just go ahead and put this here right on the stage. This is Pete. This is Pete Hegseth. And I'll let it play here. I'll let it play. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. They don't want me to win here.
The War Department will not be distracted by democracy building, interventionism, undefined wars, regime change, climate change, woke moralizing, and feckless nation building. We will instead put our nation's practical, concrete interests first. We will deter war. We will advance our interests. We will defend our people. Peace is our goal. And in service of that objective, we will always be ready to fight and win decisively if called upon. As part of this mission, we are asking American taxpayers to fund the world's greatest military. We're asking mothers and fathers across America to trust us with their most precious resource, their sons and daughters. And we will honor their trust and their sacrifice.
First thing I want to say is he just said there wasn't going to be no regime changes.
Trust us.
That
your
is,
sons and your daughters.
And your daughters.
Your most precious resource. What did we just say, right? Capitalism sees human beings as fuel to feed the machine. Feed us your sons and daughters. Trust us. We're not going to do nation building. What is Venezuela? We're not going to do regime change. What is Venezuela? Like, every word is a lie. You know what I'm saying? We're tired of being worried about the wokeism. Oh, we're not worried about war crimes. We'll translate that into real time. We're no longer worried about climate change. Well, I guess I wouldn't be either if the United States military is 50% of the pollution in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, of course, they can't be worried about these things. They understand that's not even a secondary contradiction for them. The military can never be worried about things like climate change, and they can't, because they have to be able to project force in however they need to. You know what I'm saying? That is just statecraft, and so that's really the most honest thing that he said. But again, this is the man that changed, his title from the Secretary of Defense to Secretary of War. And he doesn't call the people in the military soldiers, Marines. He calls them war fighters. All of that distinction is going airman, sailor, soldier, Marine, all that. You're a war fighter. So what do war fighters do? A firefighter fights fire. What does a war fighter do? And it's all right there. He's saying that he's going to hit hard. This is literally Lord of the Rings. They will come hard. They will come fast. I worry about what that first strike will look like. Right now, what they're doing is they're tightening a noose. We've said on this show several times that a blockade is an act of war. There are reports that the president will make an official declaration of war a little bit later on today. We'll keep up with you guys if that happens. But his statement is pretty close to a proclamation of that. This goes back to what my original fears were. We talked about this on this show, about what was really happening with the Americans meeting with the Russians. The Russians have a history of giving up the global South to save their ass. There's a very strong possibility, and it'll become obvious really within the first week, how much support, right, the Russians are willing to provide to the Venezuelans should they find themselves in this position. But to me, it seems like a deal was made, and this is why they've been pushing Zelensky to pipe the fuck down. We have agreed with Putin not to provide any more weapons so that the Russians don't provide any weapons to the Venezuelans. It's a very strong possibility that Russia took that deal. If I was Venezuela, I would assume I have no support coming from Russia. I would assume I have no support coming from China, right? Simply because logistics is real. Like, even if they wanted to do these things, you're in a whole other side of the world. And this is an advantage that the United States has. When we talk about the difference between a power, a rising power, and a hegemonic superpower, right? Maybe Russia can fight America to a standstill in Ukraine. Maybe Russia can beat the Americans in Russia. But could the Russians beat the Americans in Egypt? Probably not, right? We saw that they couldn't in Syria, right? Syria is a hell of a lot closer than Venezuela. And China has, for all intents and purposes, never involved itself in these kind of things geopolitically. China does not go to war to defend your country. China just wants to do business. But it goes back to what we always say about ultimately only you can protect you. And ultimately what it's going to come down to is the resolve and the grit of the Venezuelan people in the face of a superior adversary militarily, at least as far as on paper, what it looks like. On land, who knows? And ultimately, no one knows the technology that the Venezuelans have, because they're untested as far as war goes. All they've had is kind of low impact skirmishes with narco terrorists, things like that, policing actions. This is not a military that's at war, and hasn't been at war for quite some time. The United States military is always at war. So that in and of itself is a huge advantage. But the will of a people to resist is a thing that is incalculable. And that's what we learned in Cuba. That's what we learned in Vietnam. And we shall see, But, as a progressive, my highest stance is anti-war. This is above and beyond all other forms of activism that I do. There is nothing worse that humans do to each other than war. War is a place where no matter what the rules are, win is the only rule. And that is what will happen. Every aspect of this attack is unimaginable, right? Like, how will the Americans open their volley? If we're to think about how the Iraq war started, it was an exceptional show of incredible air power. Will the Americans be able to pull off such an attack again, right? Has there been enough time for the global South to be able to build up defenses against the type of war that was waged against Iraq in the last 20 years? Only time will tell, but it looks like we'll be learning sooner than later. It looks like war is all but inevitable.
War is already happening in places like Ukraine. And you mentioned this before, if there is going to be some sort of change or movement, obviously there's only so many forces. There's only so many weapons. There's only so many things that can be had. And there's been a lot of discussion surrounding whether Europe will take over sort of the reins. And I just thought that this was interesting. I'm just going to play this and we can move on from there. But essentially, this is a general in the United Kingdom, and he is using the same sort of sons and daughters conversation. And this is Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton. And I'm gonna just go ahead and let this play.
And that man looks like a war fighter.
Oh yeah, no, he's been through the rigors of battle and all those things.
This impact on all of us will be the cost of building this resilience. Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight. And more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means.
The comments follow a separate speech by Blaise Metrovelli, the head of MI6. She too raised the alarm about the dangers posed by Vladimir Putin's Russia.
We all continue to face the menace of an aggressive, expansionist and revisionist Russia seeking to subjugate Ukraine and harass NATO. I find it harrowing that hundreds of thousands have died, with the toll mounting every day because of Putin's historical distortions and his compromised desire for respect.
So you still have sort of this, all these little peace plans that have full of non-starters involved, and the rhetoric still remains the same. Sons and daughters, again, Venezuela, you mentioned Russia, perhaps bowing out of sort of the conflict to come in Venezuela. Do you kind of see that this is going to continue with Europe kind of trying to take the reins here? And again, is that going to impact sort of the way that Venezuela works?
My first question is, where is these condemnations against the United States that is about to unprovokedly attack Venezuela? Where is this language? The one thing that I thought was quite interesting, especially from the MI6 person, because you got to remember they had tricksters, right? The one thing that I agree with is a lot of this came from, and we've talked about this on this show, Putin's desire to be respected by the West. I remember there was a famous general in NATO whose name escapes me, who was fired right before the war popped off with Ukraine and Russia, because he said, all Putin wants is respect. Is it worth it to go to World War III just to prove that we can disrespect him, right? That continues to assert itself. But the thing that I think the West misunderstands, right, because they have to show you two sides, right? The Putin that's desperate for respect, but then Mad Dog Putin, if he was really Mad Dog Putin, why is it that he hasn't offered to do to Ukraine the things that the United States is offering to do to Venezuela? The president himself has stated that he gave Maduro a deadline to get out of the country, you and your family, and I'll give you safe passage. Could you imagine if Putin said that to Zelensky? Do you think that the Kremlin is not able to touch Zelensky? Right? That's one thing I'm absolutely fairly certain. If Putin wanted Zelensky dead, he would not be alive. And yet, Zelensky goes around the world begging for money and picking fights everywhere he goes, right? Maduro does none of those things. Maduro stays in his country. He tries to rule his country. You see him out there dancing weird and doing socialism. But brown socialism is fatal. You can't do that. They'll kill you for it. Zelensky, on the other hand, he just funds Nazis. That's totally okay. Notice the United States has had no critique for the literal son of a Nazi who just became the president in Chile, right? For the open fascist of Milei in Argentina, right? The United States couldn't be happier about what's happening in southern South America. Yeah, it's just northern South America.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Because you mentioned it and you hadn't talked about it yet. So I want to just go ahead and say it for the folks who don't know. So we do have a new president in Chile. This is Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Congratulations, President-elect Jose Antonio Cast. On your victory. Israel looks forward to working closely with you and Chile to deepen cooperation in security, innovation, water, agriculture. This is from Margaret Kimberly. Chile's new president is quite literally the son of a Nazi who escaped to South America via the infamous rat line. The head of the Jewish state is congratulating, and you can see this is Benjamin Netanyahu, as we know. And I've mentioned this several times on this broadcast because it's important. When the elections concluded in Venezuela, the right-wing member who is backed by Machado, not Machado because she's not allowed to run, but basically the man who was running was just a puppet of hers. When he left the polling, he said, Israel has a right to defend itself. We stand with Israel. And when Maduro left from the polling station, his parting words was a peace sign saying free Palestine. So when you see, it's very easy.
At his birthday party last week, he was out there with the traditional head wrap of the Palestinian people. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's obvious, right? Like the global South, this is once again an attack on multilateralism in the realest sense. Like there is a desperate desire for the United States capitalist machine to show that socialism can never work. That is real. But also, at the end of the day, Venezuela, other than their resources, don't really matter that much to the United States. What matters is what they do with those resources. And overwhelmingly, those resources have been going to China, right? Free market, fair market, supposed to be okay. It's not like China's taking them, China's buying them. But the United States doesn't want anyone to have access to that other than who they want. And so to them, it's literally it's our oil. How can you give our oil to China? That I can't explain that mindset any more simply than that. The United States feels as if they are entitled to the resources, the complete resources of the American continent, North America and South America. This is why they're revitalizing this Monroe Doctrine talk, right? All of America belongs to the United States, even if we haven't picked it up yet. This is why they don't see it as any type of conflict in their worldview. To them, it is an immigration issue. What you do with your people affects us because all of this is ours. Your land is ours. Your people is ours. Your gold is ours. Your oil is ours. All of your resources are ours. And you don't give them to China. Like that is just... that's their crime. Their crime is they sell oil to China. So ultimately, you have to remember this is a threat and an attack on China as much as it is an attack on Venezuela. This is an attempt to once again deprive China of the resources that they need. Because remember, it's not just a cultural race. It is a race to AGI. We have the Chinese AI systems and their energy needs, and we have the American AI systems and their energy needs. And the Americans want to deprive the Chinese energy so that they will not reach AGI before the Americans.
And there goes the fight that is beginning and started in Ukraine. It's now moving here to Venezuela, or hopefully it's not, but it does look inevitable. Like that's it. And, you could also say Iraq. You could also say Afghanistan. And those are, we can't limit it to those. The destabilization all through Africa, Congo, which goes back, of course, to Belgium. And, it's a destabilization and resource extraction world if you're the United States and the West. I mean, France, too. You can look at their work in Niger, and we've talked about that as well. So, you mentioned it all. And I think the United States, you have to say the truth, which is they are going to fight a war in a country that does not have any ill will or violence towards them. And they are going to steal resources directly from there. No casus belli.
And they're going to spend your sons and daughters to do it.
And
they've told you quite honestly.
People are going to die, because that's what happened in Afghanistan. These people were not leaving from their homes. And there's going to be many Venezuelans, no matter what, Maduro says or anyone else that are ready to protect their land. You see this, we're big UFC fans. You hear Bryce Harper talk about this. You know, I don't want to go to war over there, but if anyone came over here, you know, I would stand, fight, and die. And I think that's sort of where the average Venezuelan is with this. And again, the Peace Prize went to opposition leadership that got snuck out in the middle of the night on a cruise ship somewhere.
Stay with your people.
Can't stay with
They'll
your
need
people.
you now. If you really the leader, war is coming to your people. Stay with your people.
Yeah, so where you at, Machado? Go ahead and get your Peace Prize ready, you know, because it is definitely soaked in blood. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners who are available everywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. InnerCityLeft.com, Fables, Foibles, Other American Sins. Come get it. Come rock with us. Very good work. And, you know, a legend in the South. He doesn't talk much about his poetry, but certainly well-renowned in that art form. Music everywhere. I mean, TMK, Lil Tanky. Search it where you find your music. Patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. We love our patrons. Much love to y'all. Anything I missed, Tanky? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I should say these things at the beginning of the video, but like and share. You know the algorithm hate us. It's only y'all that can help us win. You know what I'm saying? Especially if you're not a person that can Patreon, which I understand most people can't. Please like, please subscribe, please share. Please watch these videos, take it in and make the adjustments you need. You know what I'm saying? Take this knowledge, especially when it comes at such risk. Because us rebels is whisked away swiftly.
You know, and rate us. You know, if you listen to us on Spotify or Apple, rate us. Those things really help us as well. And, you know, I wish there was more people talking about the things that we were talking about with the backgrounds that we have, but there isn't. Usually people with the backgrounds that we have are talking about something different, and people who do talk about this, very hoity-toity
or Republican
or ex-CIA, some guy who used to work for them and was like, no, you know, but I'm
a good guy now.
We're not funded by the state, and we're not ops. And I don't know I don't know who is and who isn't an op, but I do know that I'm not an op, and I'm pretty sure Amoja's not an op. So that's about the best I can do. I know Kita's not an op. I'm pretty sure. So we'll leave it there. Thank y'all for listening always. No war in Venezuela. Please, 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 if you're at the
turn that up
table.
Way more than anything about us. Turn up the no war in Venezuela talk.
We know
no war.
You will be at home with your families during the break. So if any conversation surrounding Venezuela comes up, you need to be arguing with auntie and uncle and aunt. Let them know. You know, that can't happen. But anyway, hopefully most of our listeners are already pretty anti-war. But with that being said, for Amoja, Lil Tanky Summer, I'm Amin TMK. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.